Gunforged is in a bit of development hell. A while back, I released a demo for the game, which you can play by clicking the link in the description below. The demo was unfortunately plagued by crashes, stutters, and hitches. Despite the rocky performance for the launch of the demo, I have gotten a lot of great feedback. The majority of comments about the demo were positive, but there were also very critical comments that called into question core elements of the game. And this is where the development hell comes in. For those that are new to this devlog series, Gunforged is a fantasy roguelite shooter where you construct powerful and unique builds every run. You forge your dual guns from a huge number of randomized parts and acquire game-changing abilities to create the ultimate monster-slaying hero. Before I get into why Gunforged is in a bit of this development hell, let's talk about feedback for a moment. Almost all feedback from players is good. Even the most obnoxious comments can have a glimmer of truth in them. Admittedly, it's hard to depersonalize negative criticism, and negative criticism can put a damper on your motivations. It certainly does for me in some cases. For example, this comment is immediately prickly. It starts with the words, "didn't likey." An inexperienced developer might immediately become defensive at this comment. I certainly would have when I was younger. This is not something you want to see after putting many hours of work into your game. But had I gotten worked up over that opening, I would have missed or disregarded the really good feedback that continues in the comment. The player goes on to say, "Gun upgrades were weird. I didn't know what benefit there was to picking one over another, and my guns would actually get weaker if I took a certain upgrade." The player continues with, "I think some kind of micro objectives/events during the wave clear could make things more interesting, but these are all just vague suggestions. It may be that something more fundamental has to be reworked." What does this player's feedback tell me? It tells me that the player didn't like the game because the game wasn't engaging or informative enough. The player has identified for me exactly the areas of my game that I need to improve to win this player over. It's worth remembering that this player was interested enough in my game to give it a try and leave feedback. The effort put into doing those two things alone is a great indicator that something attracted this player to Gunforged, even if they ultimately didn't enjoy it. The feedback provided by that player is exactly the kind of feedback game developers should appreciate, even if the feedback is phrased in a slightly prickly manner. The feedback on Gunforged overall was generally very positive. Players liked the movement and controls, as well as the game feel. Players seemed to like the premise of the game too. However, there were broad areas of agreement between the players about what needs to be improved. First and foremost, the performance issues. There are still noticeable stutters and occasional crashes that I have to address, so that will be one of my top priorities. The second most common bit of feedback was confusion about the gun upgrade system. Players didn't seem to like the reforging of gun parts and were often confused about what effect parts would have on their weapons. Some players expressed frustration that sometimes they could choose an upgrade that actually felt worse, even if it was better on paper. This player provides some excellent feedback on this topic. The forge screen is lacking in information. It gives information on the stat changes, but not the effect on the firing. Don't know how to explain, but you pick an upgrade that the screen says only adds stuff, only to find out afterwards that the gun went from another firing mode. The player goes on to say, "The same can be said about the forge screen and parts. Unless you know the parts and the art for its type, you don't really know what part/firing mode you give up by only tabbing to look at the gun screen." And finally, the third most common piece of feedback was that there's no way to really plan out your build properly. All the pieces of planning the build are there, but it's just too random to be fun. And so this brings me to why I say Gunforged is in a bit of development hell. I understand all of this feedback, and it's exactly the kind of feedback that I wanted to hear, except I'm not entirely sure how to address each of these items. Performance issues are something that I'm just gonna have to keep tinkering with, which is discouraging because I've already spent many hours on this issue, but it's not proven to be fruitful ultimately. To address the issues raised by by the players with the Forge upgrade screen, it seems I need to simultaneously show more and less information. Some players were overwhelmed by information, some players didn't have enough information, and some players didn't even understand the information they were given. It's tempting to fix this by just slapping more text on the screen, but that's not ideal for a couple of reasons. Number one, people don't read. Number two, I only have a canvas of 640 by 360 pixels, so there's physically no room on screen for all the information I could show the player. And number three, people don't read. I needed a way to give players the information they need without overwhelming them with text. It took me a few weeks of experimentation, but I think I came up with an overhaul of the upgrade system that comes close to solving these issues. In the previous upgrade system, players were presented with one potential part they could slot into either their left or right guns. They had the option to equip this part or to reforge it up to 2 times to potentially receive a better part for their build. They could also opt to take gold if they didn't want to take a gun part. In the new system I've made as a response to your feedback, there's a new upgrade table where all 3 potential gun parts are shown to you at once. You can freely swap between all of these parts, meaning you could take all of them or none of them or only 2 of them if you desire. And you can try out your guns on the new training dummies that also give you DPS counters. If you don't like the changes you made to your gun, you can revisit the upgrade table to revert your guns back to their previous configurations. There's still some work to do to make this a smoother experience, but I think this solves some of the big issues players had with the weapon upgrade system. Instead of needing to read a wall of text to understand what a part does, you can equip it and try it out on the training dummies. You can freely revert to a previous part, meaning no change can permanently destroy your build, and you get more control over your build because you can select any or all of the parts presented to you. One downside to the new system is that there's no longer an option to receive bonus gold if none of the upgrade parts work for you. However, I also received feedback that the gold was already too easy to accrue, so perhaps removing the ability to receive gold during the upgrade process is not actually a problem. This overhaul is the first of many major changes that are an attempt to preserve the good aspects of the game while reworking the bad aspects. I have to be careful with how I approach these overhauls because I don't want to lose any of the elements of the game that make it a positive experience for players. This is where the development hell comes from. It feels like I'm trying to find a very specifically and oddly shaped puzzle piece to fit into the very specifically and oddly shaped hole in my game's design. Finding that piece often takes a lot of brainstorming, tinkering, and playtesting, which is much slower than the usual pace of development. I can work on a system for hours and feel like I've made no progress. The next big chunk of feedback to tackle is related to the moment-to-moment gameplay. There was a common thread of feedback that the wave clear phase can get a little monotonous. This will be remedied in part by the multiple arenas that the player will fight through. However, I can do more to fix this issue as well. To address this feedback, I'm planning to make it more obvious when enemies are planning to attack. I'm also going to reduce the range of weapons across the board in order to make the gameplay more challenging and also to make long-range weapons stand out more. I also have an elite enemy system that I can continue building on, which I think will add a lot of variety to the wave clear phase. After that, I plan to focus on how to further give players more control over their build paths. This is probably going to be the most difficult thing to plan for and may take several weeks of experimentation before I settle on a good system. And finally, I still need to build an overarching meta progression system. I had intended to start on that by now, but I think it's critical that the core gameplay systems feel as good to play as possible before I consider that feature. It doesn't make sense to me to build meta progression on top of core systems that have big flaws. I need to fix the flawed systems first. I was originally hoping to release Gunforged this year, but it needs more time in the oven to be as good as it can possibly be. That's why I will be moving the release date to the first half of 2024. Progress is slow, but taking my time is going to be necessary to produce something worth playing. Thank you all for watching, and thank you to everyone who is leaving feedback on the Steam feedback thread and in the YouTube comments. Your feedback is always extremely valuable. If you like what you see, you can wishlist Gunforged on Steam. The link for that is in the description. I will see you in the next Gunforged devlog. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to like and subscribe. You can wishlist Gunforged on Steam, and if you want to learn how to build a 2D survivor style game in Godot 4, you can check out my Udemy course. To stay up to date with my content, you can sign up for my newsletter at firebelly.com. Links for all of that are in the description below.